In 1987, a small town tucked deep in the mountains of West Virginia seemed ordinary on the surface. Quiet streets, the hum of daily life, children playing in the dust of back roads. But behind closed doors, whispers began to spread. Rumors of two sisters, Clara and Lila, who moved through the town with a calm that unsettled even those who thought they knew them. People reported strange disappearances of animals, fires that appeared without cause, and neighbors avoiding each other in the dark. By the time anyone realized the extent of what was happening, the sisters were gone, leaving behind a town forever changed, and a story that would echo for decades. Who were Clara and Lila, and what could have compelled them to unravel an entire community, leaving only shadows and unanswered questions behind? Before we continue, hit like and subscribe if you're brave enough for more stories from Appalachia. Comment below where you're watching from, and tell us if the wind whispered through the trees tonight, would you hear it? The town itself was small, isolated, carved out of the Appalachian mountains like a pocket of another time. Dirt roads wound between clusters of aging houses, the paint peeling from years of harsh winters. Most families had lived there for generations, their lives tightly intertwined through blood, labor, and shared histories. Life was simple, predictable, and in many ways comforting. But beneath the surface, the town carried its own secrets. Stories of strange happenings had always circulated in hushed tones: disappearances of livestock, unexplained fires, doors left unlocked despite no one entering. The townsfolk joked about it sometimes, but there was a quiet unease that lingered in the air, like the fog that rolled down the mountains each evening. In 1987, that fog seemed heavier, thicker, as though it carried something unseen. Economic hardship weighed on everyone. Factories and local businesses had closed, leaving families to scrape by on the land, hunting, farming, or taking whatever seasonal work came their way. The children roamed freely, climbing trees and exploring the dense woods that bordered the town. But the woods had a reputation. Parents whispered warnings about getting lost, about voices that sometimes carried in the wind. On certain nights, it felt as if the mountains themselves were watching, listening, waiting. It was into this quiet, watchful town that Clara and Lila stepped. Or perhaps it was the town that had been waiting for them. Their presence seemed ordinary at first. They laughed like any other young women. They walked the streets in pairs, always together, always observing. But even then, something about them drew attention. It wasn't fear, at least not yet, but curiosity, a sense that beneath the smiles there was something that no one could fully understand, and that everyone would come to feel sooner or later. Clara and Lila, two names that would become whispered warnings, a story parents told their children when they wanted them to behave. At first, they seemed like any other young women in the town. They walked together, laughed together, and moved through the streets in perfect harmony. But there was something about them that felt off, something that people noticed but couldn't fully explain. They were 18, inseparable, like reflections of one another. Their hair caught the sunlight in the same way. Their voices carried the same soft cadence. And yet, when you looked closely, it was impossible to ignore the way their eyes lingered on people, not with kindness, not with cruelty, but with calculation. The sisters observed everything, catalogued every small habit, every unspoken fear, and they seemed to understand the town in ways no one else could. Early signs of their influence were subtle. A neighbor's dog would vanish, only to reappear days later, trembling and silent. A few cows were found dead in the fields, no explanation given. Children in the town started following them, almost mesmerized, repeating phrases they had been told or doing tasks on command that no one understood. Yet, when adults intervened, Clara and Lila would smile and shake their heads innocently, as if nothing had happened. Stories began to circulate quietly, at first dismissed as coincidence, then accepted with uneasy acknowledgement. Friends and classmates whispered about the girls' unusual behaviors, how they seemed to toy with people, manipulating small events for their own amusement. Yet no one could claim definitively that they had done anything truly criminal. It was something else, something that unsettled the town on a level deeper than logic or evidence. And while most people tried to look away or rationalize what they saw, some could feel it, an undercurrent of tension that seemed to follow Clara and Lila wherever they went. At the corner of a street, at the edge of a field, or peering from behind the curtains of a home window, they were always there, watching, waiting. And the more the town tried to ignore it, the more the girl's presence became impossible to dismiss. By the time the first serious incidents began to occur, it was clear that Clara and Lila were no longer just two girls in a quiet mountain town. They were something that the town could not control, could not predict, and could not stop. As the weeks passed, the town began to notice patterns that could no longer be dismissed as coincidences. Small disturbances at first, an animal missing from a farm, a fire in a barn that had no clear cause, a neighbor's tools disappearing from a shed. Each incident alone might have been chalked up to misfortune, but together they painted a picture that was impossible to ignore. Clara and Lila were always nearby. People reported seeing them near the edges of forests at night, their silhouettes moving silently through the mist. Children spoke of being dared to do things they would never normally do, then returning home with wide eyes and trembling hands. A sense of unease spread quietly, seeping into homes, into conversations, into the very streets of the town. People began to notice subtle changes in one another. A glance held too long, whispers in corners, doors left locked that were once open. It was in these early signs that the town first began to understand the reach the sisters had. Clara and Lila didn't act with violence at first. Their influence was far more insidious, creeping into the everyday rhythms of the town. People found themselves anxious for no clear reason, uneasy when the sisters were near, and relieved when they were gone. Rumors began to form. Strange sounds in the night, glimpses of figures moving in the shadows, livestock found dead with no trace of a predator. Neighbors tried to rationalize it. Perhaps the girls were mischievous, maybe even cruel, but nothing beyond what young people might do. Yet there were those who felt it, an almost imperceptible tension, a quiet dread growing each day. Each new incident seemed minor, but together they were a warning, a prelude to events no one could have imagined. The sisters had a way of appearing in multiple places at once. If a fire broke out in one part of town, Clara and Lila could be seen walking calmly elsewhere, as if watching, waiting, knowing. And while adults struggled to find answers, children were drawn inexplicably toward them, repeating tasks and phrases as though under a spell. The town had entered a state of quiet vigilance. People started locking doors during the day. Animals were kept inside. Fences were repaired, watched, and guarded. And through it all, Clara and Lila moved like shadows on the edges of reality, present yet untouchable, leaving the town in a growing sense of apprehension that none could fully articulate. As spring turned to summer, the subtle disturbances of the town began to grow bolder, more deliberate, and impossible to ignore. Fires broke out in barns that were carefully tended, livestock vanished in the middle of the night, and strange marks appeared on fences and doorways. At first, the townspeople tried to explain it away. Wild animals, careless neighbors, accidents. But those explanations no longer held. There was a pattern emerging, a rhythm that could not be dismissed, and all eyes eventually turned toward the two sisters. Clara and Lila were seen more frequently, their presence increasingly unavoidable. Shadows seemed to stretch around them, slipping along the edges of the forest, across fields, through alleys. Children were still drawn to them, compelled to act in ways that made parents uneasy. Adults who had once ignored or rationalized the girls' influence now began to whisper in corners, exchanging stories of animals that were found dead with unusual wounds, of doors that were locked from the inside with no explanation, of windows smashed without any sign of entry. Fear began to spread. It moved silently at first, uneasy glances over shoulders, conversations cut short when the sisters approached, a nervousness that lingered even after they left. People felt watched, judged, measured by unseen standards that only Clara and Lila seemed to understand. Rumors circulated that the sisters could somehow manipulate people, bending them to their will without raising suspicion. It was impossible to know if this was true, but the pattern of fear suggested something beyond ordinary behavior. Isolated incidents escalated. Townsfolk reported being followed at night, hearing whispers in the wind, or catching fleeting glimpses of the girls in places they could not have reached. Animals were found mutilated in ways that no natural predator could account for. Fires flared in abandoned fields and barns, extinguished before firefighters could arrive. The town's sense of safety, fragile from the start, began to crumble. Clara and Lila's influence was subtle, but undeniable. They did not confront people directly. They did not shout or rage. Instead, they moved through the town with a calm, almost serene presence, as if everything around them was an extension of their will. And the more the townsfolk tried to resist, the more pervasive their effect became. Fear had seeped into every home, every street, every corner of the town. People spoke in hushed voices, glanced over their shoulders, and double-checked locks that once had been left open. By the time the first truly alarming event occurred, the town was already on edge. The groundwork had been laid. Tension, suspicion, and fear had taken root in every home. And as the sun set on one warm summer evening, those quiet tremors of dread would explode into something that no one could have imagined. A night that would be remembered for decades. A night when the town itself seemed to unravel under the presence of two young women who moved like shadows at the edge of everything. The night the town would never forget began quietly, as most nights did, with the hum of crickets and the faint rustle of the wind through the trees. But by the time the first candle flickered out in a farmhouse, the calm had already been broken. Fires erupted in barns, not by accident, but in a way that suggested deliberate placement. Windows shattered across the town, startling families awake, and animals that had survived earlier disappearances were found dead, their bodies arranged in patterns that sent shivers down anyone who saw them. Townsfolk reported hearing strange sounds, low whispers that seemed to move through the streets, footsteps in places where no one should have been, fleeting shadows that vanished the moment anyone looked directly at them. People fled from their homes in confusion, locking doors behind them, gathering in the town square under the faint light of lanterns. Panic spread quickly. The town, which had already been on edge, now faced an event that none could understand or explain. Through it all, Clara and Lila were seen moving calmly, almost impossibly, through the chaos. They were here, there, in the distance, sometimes appearing to walk alongside the terrified townsfolk without anyone noticing. One resident reported seeing them standing at the edge of a burning barn, their faces calm, expressionless, watching the flames consume what had been a stable place of life and work. Others swore they saw the sisters vanish into the woods in a blink, only to reappear on the other side of town moments later. The night stretched on, and the chaos did not subside. Fires were extinguished, only to flare again elsewhere. Families tried to regroup, searching for children, neighbors, and livestock, but everything seemed to unravel faster than they could respond. The town's nerves frayed with every passing hour, every unexplained sound, every sudden disappearance. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the chaos stopped. Clara and Lila were gone. The streets emptied, the shadows receded. Only the evidence of that night remained. Burned barns, broken fences, terrified families, and a silence that was heavier than any darkness the town had known. People searched the forests, called for neighbors, but the sisters had vanished entirely. No one saw them leave. No one knew where they had gone. By dawn, the town was changed. Fear had transformed into a pervasive awareness that nothing would ever be the same. Homes had been abandoned in haste, livestock lost, and families left questioning everything they had believed about safety, community, and the quiet mountains that surrounded them. Clara and Lila had vanished, leaving the town behind, but their presence lingered, etched into the memory of everyone who had lived through that night. It was the night when the town fell into darkness, a darkness not caused by clouds or storms, but by two sisters who moved like shadows, untouchable and unstoppable. And even decades later, the story of that night would not fade, as people continued to speak of the girls, of what they had seen, and of the fear that had settled over a town that would never be the same. The morning after the night of chaos, the town awoke to a silence that was heavier than any darkness it had known. Smoke still hung in the air, curling from barns that had burned, from fences splintered beyond repair. Livestock had vanished or perished. Homes that once felt safe now carried the weight of fear in every creaking floorboard, every shutter rattling in the wind. Families emerged cautiously, scanning the streets, counting heads, checking on neighbors. Conversations were subdued, cautious, as everyone struggled to comprehend the scale of what had happened. The sisters, Clara and Lila, were nowhere to be found. Search parties scoured the forests, calling their names into the fog, but the girls had vanished as completely as the shadows themselves. In the days and weeks that followed, the town changed in ways that could not be measured in bricks or fences. People moved differently, spoke more quietly, and double-checked doors even in the middle of the day. Children no longer played at the edges of the woods, and farmers tended their fields with a constant unease, glancing toward the trees as if expecting to see something watching them. The incident had left more than physical destruction. It had left a psychological mark, invisible but unmistakable. Whispers of the sisters' presence continued long after they were gone. Sightings were reported by travelers passing through the area decades later. A fleeting figure at the edge of a forest, laughter carried on the wind, shadows moving where none should exist. These stories were told quietly, often to children as cautionary tales, warning them to stay away from the forests or to be wary of strangers who moved too calmly. The legend of Clara and Lila grew with every retelling, each account layering new details, whether true or imagined. Some said the sisters had left behind a trail of misfortune for the town, a reminder that control and safety were illusions. Others believed they had simply disappeared into the mountains, becoming part of the landscape itself, indistinguishable from the mist and shadows that had always clung to the Appalachian hills. And while the town rebuilt, restoring fences, barns, and homes, a quiet tension remained, woven into the fabric of everyday life. Even decades later, some residents would pause when walking past the edge of the forest, a memory flashing in their minds of two figures who had moved with a calm that defied explanation, and a presence that left a permanent mark on a small West Virginia town. As the years passed, the story of Clara and Lila took on a life of its own. Those who had lived through that night spoke of the sisters with a mix of awe and fear, their voices hushed as if saying the names too loudly might draw them back. Stories circulated, some claiming to have glimpsed the girls in the forests long after their disappearance, shadows slipping silently between the trees, laughter faint and haunting in the night. Folklore began to blend with memory. Some said the sisters had never truly left, that they existed somewhere along the edges of perception, moving through the town like whispers. Others tried to find rational explanations, suggesting that Clara and Lila were highly intelligent manipulators using fear, coincidence, and the suggestibility of others to shape events to their liking. Yet, for all attempts to explain, the strange occurrences had been real, undeniable, and deeply unsettling. Theories multiplied. Psychologists would later speculate about their upbringing, the isolation of the town, and the psychological impact of rural life in the Appalachian Mountains. Some believed that the sisters had an uncanny ability to read people, to exploit weaknesses, and to orchestrate events in a way that left no evidence. Others, however, believed that something about the sisters went beyond explanation, a presence that could not be fully understood, moving quietly but powerfully through the town. Even decades later, sightings continued to be reported. Travelers passing through would swear they saw two figures moving together in the fog, pausing at the edge of a forest before disappearing entirely. Residents spoke of hearing soft, echoing laughter on nights when the wind carried strange sounds through the trees. Each new account, whether confirmed or dismissed, kept the story alive, ensuring that Clara and Lila remained etched into the consciousness of the town and its surroundings. The sisters became more than individuals. They became a symbol of the unknown, a living reminder that even in the quietest, most isolated places, the unexpected could happen. And though no one could say for certain what had truly occurred, the legend endured, whispered at kitchen tables, around campfires, and through generations, keeping alive a memory that refused to fade into the mountains. Decades have passed since that night in 1987, yet the town still remembers. The forests, the empty streets, the old barns, they all hold traces of a story that never truly ended. Clara and Lila are gone, yet they are everywhere at once. In the rustling of leaves, the soft footsteps on dirt roads, the faint echoes of laughter carried on the wind. The legend has grown, shaped by memory and imagination, by fear and fascination. Some claim the sisters can still be seen, just beyond the edge of the forest, their figures flickering in the fog, always together, always watching, Others insist it is impossible, that time has erased them. Yet every so often the stories resurface. Someone notices a shadow moving differently, hears a sound that cannot be explained, or glimpses two figures standing silently on a distant hill. And in those moments, the town remembers what it felt like to be watched, to feel powerless, to realize that the ordinary world can change in an instant. The story of Clara and Lila is a reminder that even in the quietest corners of the world, mysteries persist, waiting for those willing or unwilling to encounter them. Perhaps the sisters vanished entirely. Perhaps they are still out there, blending into the fog and trees, waiting for someone to wander too close. Whatever the truth, the legend endures. And if you ever find yourself walking the Appalachian woods at night, listen carefully. You might hear the faintest echo of two young women laughing, a sound that has haunted this town for decades, and may continue to haunt anyone who dares enter their shadowed domain. If you've heard tales like this, or have your own experiences to share, comment below. Did Clara and Lila truly disappear? Or are they still out there, hidden among the shadows? Share your thoughts and theories, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories from the Appalachian Mountains.